Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into, well, a pretty provocative piece by Paul Joseph Watson. It's called The War on Iran Begins.
That's right. And it gives this really critical, uh, sometimes quite cynical perspective on recent U.S. and Israeli military moves.
So our goal today, our mission, is to really unpack what Watson's getting at.
Exactly. We'll look at his arguments, which range from, deep skepticism about interventions to their consequences.
Which he sees as often unforeseen.
Right. And even surprisingly, a detour into personal well-being. It's definitely a source meant to make you think, maybe question things a bit.
See connections you might not have otherwise. Okay, let's jump in.
Sounds good.
Watson really comes out swinging, kicks off with some intense sarcasm.
Oh, yeah. He immediately goes after former President Trump's supposed anti-war stance.
By highlighting the ongoing U.S. military support for Israel. It's a very pointed way to start.
And what's really striking is how he uses that statistic right away, claiming only, was it 19% of Trump's own voters backed joining Israel's conflict?
Sets a tone of perceived betrayal, doesn't it? Like a disconnect between the talk and the walk.
Definitely. And he doesn't just stick to the present. He immediately draws these parallels to history.
Yeah, he brings up the Iraq WMD hoax, as he calls it. You know, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing.
And the Iran nuclear scare, which he points out, kind of wryly, has been going on for maybe 30 years without Iran actually getting the bomb.
So the framing here, in his view at least, is that military action is often just.
Fear-mongering propaganda, that's his term, not driven by legitimate security needs.
Which makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we see these kinds of narratives pop up again and again?
That's a really good question. And what's the long-term effect on how people see these things?
Okay, so he establishes this deep skepticism. Where does he go next? What about the actual tangible consequences?
Right. This is where he really lays out his perhaps most powerful, maybe most uncomfortable argument. That these interventions pretty much always lead to chaos. Specifically, he talks about demographic destabilization.
Meaning?
Basically, large waves of migrants moving into Western countries, which he argues creates huge strain cultural shifts. He sees it as a direct negative outcome that people often ignore.
And he links this directly to terrorism.
Very directly. He gives examples like the Manchester Arena bomber says he was a refugee from Libya and the Paris attacks. He ties them straight back to the aftermath of these U.S.-led regime changes.
So a clear cause and effect argument in his mind.
Exactly. His core message is pretty blunt. You can't bomb a nation, displace its people, then import them without expecting blowback.
And that other quote really sticks too.
We bomb them over there and then import them anyway.
Yeah.
It's designed to be provocative, to challenge that idea that foreign policy happens over there and has no domestic cost. He's saying the cost is real, and it includes societal impact.
Okay, so shifting focus slightly, he then really zooms in on Iran itself.
He does. He tackles that narrative, the one that claims Iran is always weeks away from getting a nuclear weapon.
Despite, as he points out, decades of predictions that haven't panned out, sounds like he sees it as a bit of a boy who cried wolf scenario.
Pretty much. He's very critical, cynical even, about what he calls the overblown rhetoric from the media, from generals.
And he contrasts that with what he sees as, well, public indifference, at least until recently.
Suggesting a gap between the official story and maybe what people are actually concerned about day to day.
He also makes that point about Iran's missile development sounding familiar.
Eerily similar, yeah, to the kinds of claims made before the Iraq War. He wants you to hear that echo.
But he does concede one point, doesn't he? A concrete threat.
Yes, he does acknowledge the potential for Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
And the impact of that.
Potentially devastating, economically speaking.
Yeah.
For the West, anyway. You'd see oil prices shoot up, inflation. That's a tangible risk he thinks is real and could directly affect, well, everyone listening.
And his predictions get even darker from there.
He suggests that if a war does escalate, Iran might activate sleeper cells in the West.
Wow.
And also trigger, even more significant refugee flows into Europe, especially the UK. He throws out a number 20,000 plus Iranians already crossing illegally to underscore that point. It's a very stark picture.
Okay, so just as we're digesting all that,
Yeah.
the article takes this just completely unexpected turn. It honestly made me do a double take.
Ah, yes. The magnesium supplement.
Exactly. Suddenly there's this lengthy plug for magnesium. How does that fit in?
It's a really jarring shift, isn't it? It's framed basically as a way to cope, a solution for anxiety, for sleep problems in this crazy, chaotic world he's just described.
He even mentions specific people like Dr. Eric Berg, Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Right, positioning them as backers of how effective magnesium is.
And gets super specific about the blend. Magnesium threonate, apigenin, L-theanine, all for brain function, stress reduction, better sleep. It feels like an ad dropped into the middle of a geopolitical rant.
But, I think it functions metaphorically, too. It almost like, while the world is burning, Watson's saying, hey, you can at least sleep like a baby.
Which could be read
As a pretty scathing commentary on public apathy, maybe. As much as it is just selling a supplement, it's a very cynical, interesting connection he draws between global chaos and personal self-care, almost.
So, moving towards this conclusion, he wraps things up by arguing for consistency.
Yeah, he emphasizes his own stance, says he's been anti-intervention since he was, 18? And he hasn't wavered.
Suggesting it's about principle for him, not just which way the political wind is blowing.
And that leads him to criticize some prominent figures in the MAGA movement, people he sees as now backing escalation with Iran.
He has that line about Middle Eastern regime change.
Always ends in disaster, yeah. He lays it out. Short-term violence, long-term demographic oblivion. It shows a real split with some he might usually align with.
And he poses some pretty direct, challenging questions to his own audience.
Very direct, like, is this really America first or Israel first?
And that follow-up. Can we honestly believe this time will be any different? He's really pushing them to think critically about it.
Yeah. And if you zoom out, look at the bigger picture he's painting. It all loops back
to themes like,
well, media manipulation, what he calls the neoconservative agenda, that push for strong military intervention cynicism towards the whole military-industrial complex.
And even that idea of migration as the real battlefield.
Exactly. Plus, the idea that voices like his, dissenting voices, get suppressed by the mainstream. It's a whole worldview he's presenting.
So summing it up, Watson's piece, The War on Iran Begins, it's definitely a critical take.
Highly critical, yeah, and often uncomfortable. It challenges the stated reasons for military action and focuses hard on these far-reaching, often destructive consequences. It really pushes you to look beyond the immediate headlines.
So the big question for you, listening, what do you take away from this? Given the history he points to, the potential blowback he predicts.
And even that stark critique of public apathy hidden in the magnesium pitch.
Right. How do you process information about potential conflicts like this now? What stands out to you as the most critical way to view these really complex global events?